The bond changed things I didn't expect it to change. I had thought about it in the abstract, the mark going quiet, the veil sealed, the binding complete, the specific relief of a mission accomplished, even if the mission was nothing like any I had ever been assigned before. I had not thought about what it would feel like to stand in a root cellar at Samhain dawn with her hands around mine and understand that every decision I had made in the last 10 years, every stone destroyed, every coven suppressed, every careful, calculated step in service of an institution I now understood had been systematically dismantling the world it claimed to protect, had led here. Not despite those decisions, through them. The Morrigan had said she chose specific people, not just marked bloodlines, these people, the specific shape of who we were when we arrived at each other. I had spent 10 years becoming someone I was not proud of, in service of something I had not examined closely enough. And that person, that careful, controlled, systematically destructive person, was exactly who had needed to stand at the base of the third stone on the morning after Samhain and understand what he had done and decide what to do about it. She had spent 14 years hiding what she was in order to survive, and that person, that compressed, patient, devastatingly precise person, was exactly who had needed to enter the threshold and reweave what had been broken. The Morrigan had not chosen us despite what we had been through. She had chosen us because of it. I looked at Alana in the cellar light and understood that for the first time completely. Then the forest outside went silent in the specific way that meant something had arrived at the tree line, and we had work to do. There were 11 of them at the tree line when we came out of the garrison. 7 persons, 4 forces. I had my sword. I understood already that my sword was relevant to approximately none of what was about to happen. I kept it sheathed. The persons came forward first, not aggressively, with the specific, careful deliberateness of beings who had been on the wrong side of a closed door for 7 years and had learned that patience is more useful than force. Alana stepped forward to meet them. I stayed 1 step behind her, not because I was less capable of facing what was at the tree line. I had faced worse in the technical sense, with worse odds and less backup, but because this was her domain, her language, her specific capacity, and my job in this moment was not to act, but to be present, to be the thing at her back that did not move. I was very good at not moving when it mattered. She spoke to the nearest person in the oldest language. I could not understand the words, but I had learned to read her well enough to read the intention. Not commanding, not placating, offering something. The person answered. She turned to me briefly, her blue-gray eyes in the dawn light, already working through something, the specific expression of a woman who has just confirmed a hypothesis she had been developing since the riverbank.
The bond energy, when it released through the stones, it opened something, a temporary door, not from their world into ours, the other direction.
A way back.
For the persons, yes, they want to go home. They never wanted to be here.
And the forces? She looked at the 4 dark shapes at the tree line, vast and without patience, pressing toward the open moorland with the specific energy of things that have received a signal they have interpreted as permission.
The forces don't want to go home. They want to come in.
How long does the door stay open?
Until Samhain ends completely. Sunrise. We have perhaps 1 hour.
I looked at the 4 forces at the tree line. I looked at her. What do you need?
I need you to keep them at the tree line, all 4 of them, for 1 hour.
She said it the way she said everything that mattered, simply, directly, without performance, as though it were entirely reasonable to ask a man with a sword to hold 4 ancient forces of chaos at a tree line for 60 minutes while she opened a door between worlds. I looked at the forces. I looked at her. "All right," I said. Just that. "All right." She almost smiled. I had learned to see it, the fraction before a smile, controlled before it became one. I had been collecting them since the interrogation room, and I intended to keep collecting them for a very long time. She turned to the persons at the tree line and began to work. I turned to the forces and began to do the only thing I had ever been genuinely good at, standing between something I was protecting and something that wanted to reach it and not moving.
The forces did not fight the way anything I had trained against fought. They pressed. Constant, patient, increasing pressure. Not a charge, not a strike, the specific force of entropy made local and directed at a single point, which was me standing at the tree line between them and the open moorland. My sword was useless. I had known it would be. What was not useless was the mark, the scar on my palm that had gone quiet when the bond completed, and had, when the forces arrived, woken again in a different register. Not the searching frequency of something looking for its other half, something older, something that had been in the bloodline since the founding of the binding and had been waiting for the bond to activate it fully. The mark on my hand against the force pressure was like holding a door closed from the inside. Every muscle committed to a single direction, the door not moving, the pressure on the other side not stopping, the question of how long I could maintain it, not one I was going to spend time on. I held the line. Behind me, I could hear her working. The oldest language, the sound of the door between worlds being held open and managed, the specific quality of a person operating at the absolute edge of their capacity with perfect control of every piece of it. The persons went through one at a time. I counted them without looking back. 7 presences at the tree line becoming 6, 5, 4. The pressure from the forces redistributing each time a person departed, pressing harder into the gap. 30 minutes. The mark on my hand had stopped being a mark and had become the only thing between 4 forces and the open world behind me. 40 minutes. I did not move. I had been trained by an institution that had spent 10 years trying to make me into something it could use. It had taught me, among other things, how to hold a position. It had not taught me what I was holding it for. That I had learned from the last 7 days, from someone who had spent 14 years hiding in plain sight, and had, when the moment required it, stopped hiding completely. I was not going to move. 50 minutes. Behind me, her voice, saying something in the oldest language that I recognized, not from understanding, but from what it did to the air when she said it. The 6th person going through. 1 remaining. 55 minutes.
Tom?
I heard my name in her voice, and I knew what it meant. And I did not turn around, because I could not turn around, not yet. The 4 forces still pressing at the tree line, the pressure at its peak because the door was almost closed, and they could feel it closing, and they had been waiting 7 years for this opening, and were not willing to lose it quietly.
30 seconds.
I pressed my marked hand against the force pressure with everything the mark had and everything I had behind it, and I held it for 30 seconds more. The last person went through. The door closed. The 4 forces at the tree line, without the door, without the signal, without the permission they had interpreted the bond energy as, dispersed. Not violently. The way a pressure disperses when the thing it was pressing against is no longer there. The forest went ordinary. Cold morning, ancient oaks, the specific silence of a wood that has just returned to being only itself. I turned around. She was on her knees on the cold earth at the moorland edge, both hands flat on the ground, breathing. I crossed the distance between us and sat down beside her on the cold earth without ceremony and without asking if she needed me to, because I had learned that she would tell me what she needed and that the most useful thing I could do in the meantime was be there. We sat on the cold moorland at Samhain sunrise, and we breathed. It was, I thought, the best thing I had done in 10 years.
The sunrise came slowly. It always does on the morning after Samhain, as though the world, having spent the night at its thinnest and most permeable, needs time to remember how to be solid again. The light arriving in increments, cold at first, then less cold, then eventually the specific gold of a morning that has decided to be morning properly. We sat on the cold earth until the gold arrived. I had spent 6 days in constant motion, running, hiding, calculating, entering thresholds, reweaving veils, dispersing forces, opening doors between worlds, and holding them long enough for 7 ancient persons to find their way home. Sitting still on the cold moorland earth while the sunrise came was, I understood, something I had not done in a very long time. Perhaps since I was 9 years old, and the world had not yet taught me that sitting still was dangerous. Tom sat beside me, close enough that his shoulder was against mine, which had happened gradually over the course of sitting down and was not the result of a decision by either of us, but of physics and cold air and the specific gravitational pull of 2 people who have stopped maintaining the distance. The mark on my wrist was quiet. Not the quiet of something suppressed or hidden or compressed into the smallest possible space. The quiet of something that has arrived where it was going and has no further urgency. I looked at it in the sunrise. Triple spiral, birthmark, mine. I had hidden it since I was 9 and my grandmother burned, and I learned that what you show the world can be used against you. I had hidden it so well that I had nearly hidden it from myself. I looked at it now in the Samhain sunrise, and I felt nothing complicated about it. It was mine. It had always been mine. The world had been wrong about it, not the mark. My grandmother had known that. She had burned for knowing it. I thought of her, Myra, her cramped, careful script in the margins of books, her voice humming over fever, her hands pressing bark and root and knowing what they told her, her laugh, her name for me, Little Rock, you will endure. And I understood something I had been understanding in pieces since the river and the oak and the threshold. She had not burned because she was wrong. She had burned because the people who burned her were afraid of what she was right about. There's a difference. I had spent 14 years confusing those 2 things. I looked at the sunrise. I looked at the man sitting beside me, whose shoulder was against mine and whose mark matched mine, and who had covered a 4-hour road in 2 hours and held a line against 4 forces for 55 minutes, and had said, in the oldest language of action rather than words, something that could not be unsaid, and that I did not want unsaid. I thought about what the binding meant, what permanent meant, what the rest of our lives, whatever shape they took, whatever the world made of 2 marked people who had restored the veil and returned 7 Fomori persons to their own world and dispersed 4 forces, what all of it meant now. It meant, I decided, sitting on cold earth with a sunrise arriving and a shoulder against mine, whatever we made it mean. The Morrigan had chosen us. She had arranged the circumstances. She had been patient for a very long time, but she had not made the choice for us. That had been ours. That would always be ours.
We found Davin at the garrison gate at mid-morning, not waiting for us,
Davin did not wait, not in the sense of someone who has run out of options. He was standing at the gate with his coat straight and his hands visible, and the expression of a man who has spent the morning revising his calculations and has arrived at a new position he considers viable. The garrison soldiers were behind him, 6 of them at attention, watching us approach across the moorland with the specific, uncertain attention of men who have received contradictory information about who they were supposed to be loyal to this morning and have not yet resolved it. Tom had his sword at his hip. He did not draw it. I had my mark and my true name and the oak's memory and the river's voice and everything I had carried for 23 years that I had finally stopped pretending I wasn't carrying. I did not need to raise my hand. Davin looked at me, at Tom, at me again. He said in the precise academic voice that I had come to understand was the only voice he had, the one he used for everything from casual observation to the delivery of information he had withheld for 3 years, that the binding was complete. He could feel it. Everyone in the garrison could feel it. The specific quality of the world when the veil is doing what it was built to do, rather than failing slowly in the background. He said the Ondoct would be coming, not his soldiers here, the main order from the fortress, responding to the reports he had sent before all of this began. He said they would not understand what had happened here. They had not understood anything about the nature of the binding or the veil or the marked ones for 300 years, and there was no particular reason to expect that to change without assistance. And then he said something I had not expected. He said he could provide the assistance. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back with the cold, intelligent eyes of a man who has recalculated and found a position that serves his purposes and also, as a secondary function, serves everyone else's. He wanted access, not to the stones. The stones were sealed, the bond was made. There was no longer a mechanism for what he had originally planned, and he understood that completely. He wanted access to the knowledge, the original texts, the history of the binding and the marked ones, and the 300 years of what happened between the last bond and this one. He wanted to study it, officially, with authorization, as someone who contributed to the restoration, rather than someone who spent 3 years trying to redirect it for personal gain. I looked at Tom.
He destroyed hundreds of sacred sites. He spent 12 years helping an institution that burned people for what they were.
I know.
And?
I thought about her grandmother, about what was lost when knowledge was destroyed rather than kept, about what the world looked like when the people with the most dangerous information had no one watching them. And we keep our enemies where we can see them. Tom looked at Davin for a long time. Davin looked back with the expression of a man who has made this specific calculation and is not surprised by the conclusion.
You answer to us, not to the Ondoct, not to the fortress, to the marked ones, and to the binding you spent 3 years trying to subvert.
Davin considered this for exactly as long as it required consideration. He said, precisely, without inflection, the way he said everything, agreed. I did not trust him. I did not need to trust him. I needed to know where he was and what he was doing, and to ensure that what he was doing served the binding rather than his own considerable ambitions. That I could manage. I had been managing complicated and untrustworthy things my entire life. We left the garrison on the afternoon of the day after Samhain. Not running, not calculating escape routes or watching the tree line or listening for horses. Walking. West, the direction we had been walking since the forest clearing on Samhain night when the Morrigan had opened the Otherworld and told us what we were and what needed to be done. The world was different, and it was the same. The sacred river in the valley below had its name back. Not the same name the maps gave it, the true name, the one that existed before the maps, the one the river had known before the Ondoct had spent 10 years making everything forget itself. I could hear it from the ridge, the specific voice of a river that remembered what it was. The standing stones were still standing, the old oaks were still growing, the veil was still the veil, Not perfect, not as it had been before 10 years of damage, but restored, sealed, doing what it was built to do. The Ondoct still existed. The people who had built it and sustained it and sent it through 30 years of territories still existed. The world that had burned my grandmother still existed. But it was different in the way that all things are different when someone finally stops pretending they cannot see what they see. We had seen it. We were not going to stop seeing it. And we were, I had understood on the cold moorland at sunrise with a shoulder against mine, not done. Tom walked beside me, not behind me, not ahead of me, beside. The adjustment that had been happening gradually since the ridge above the river, and was now simply how we moved through the world. Two people who had arrived at each other by the longest possible route and had decided, with full knowledge of the cost and the nature and the permanence of the decision, that the route had been worth it. He said, looking west at the road ahead, in the direct economic voice that I had come to understand was his version of tenderness.
Where are we going?
She thought about it. There were 17 covens the Ondoct had suppressed in the Northern Territories, 17 communities of people who had been hiding what they were since before she was born, for the same reasons she had hidden, learning the same lessons she had learned at 9 years old and paying for it every day since. There were sacred wells that had forgotten their names, rivers that had gone silent, stones that had been broken and whose breaking she could feel through the restored binding like missing teeth, present in their absence, aching in the specific way of things that should be there and are not. There was a world that had spent 300 years forgetting what it was, and would need, she suspected, considerably more than one Samhain week to remember. She looked at the road west. She looked at the man walking beside her. She thought of her grandmother, Mare, little rock, you will endure, and she thought of the oak keeping her name in trust for 23 years, and the river finding its voice again, and the veil holding, and what it meant that the Morrigan stopped watching. The Morrigan stopped watching when the thing she was watching for had happened. The watching was over. The work was not. North first, the covens.
North.
And then west. The wells, the stones, all of it. A pause. Then
That will take a long time.
she looked at him. He looked back at her with the gray-blue eyes that had looked away first in the interrogation room and had not looked away from her since, and in them, underneath everything else, something that looked very much like the specific contentment of a man who has been given a direction to walk and the right person to walk it with. Yes, it will. She faced west. The road was long, and the world was large, and the veil was holding, and her grandmother's voice was in her bones, where it had always been. Little rock, you will endure. She walked. He walked beside her. Above them, 3 black ravens, cutting through the cold morning sky, heading north, not watching anymore, leading. End of Season 1. The Mark of the Morrigan will return.